It turned out that computer games had already been invented, 6 years before Atari even existed. A television set designer called Ralph Baer had been thinking about the idea since the early 50s. In 1966, it all came together while he was waiting at a bus stop on a business trip to New York.
When I got back to the office the next morning, it was September 1st, 1966, I wrote a 4-page memo. In it, I lay out the whole thing. I proposed such things as sports games, chase games, race games, car games.
Baer set to work on his invention. By 1968, he had his first television games console working, which he simply called his brown box. His first game was a game in which 2 pixels chased each other around the screen. That was quickly followed by a tennis game, still 4 years before Bushnell and Alcorn came up with Pong. TV manufacturers Magnavox signed up Baer and produced a refined version of the brown box. The Odyssey played 10 different games. Each game came with a color overlay that was stuck on the screen to enhance the primitive graphics. It had controllers, and Baer even came up with the first light gun for shooting games, an invention years ahead of its time. The Odyssey was launched at a trade show in New York in 1972.
It was absolutely the hit of the show, and everybody was very enthusiastic, as was the press.
Magnavox presents Odyssey, 12 exciting electronic games you play through your own TV. Any brand.
At another trade show in Silicon Valley on the 24th of May that year, an interesting name appeared in the visitor's book, Nolan Bushnell.
And he played the Odyssey game hands-on and played the ping pong game.
The fact is that I absolutely did see the Odyssey game, and I saw it and I didn't think it was very clever.
Whether Bushnell was inspired by the Odyssey or not, Ralph Baer had patented his designs.
This is the patent which, and if you look in the fine print up here, you can see that it was first filed January of 1968. There is a television set down here. Underneath is 2 hand controls on each side.
Based on Baer's patents, Magnavox sued Atari.
Our position was always very clear. We said, we will only settle this for less than it'll cost us to defend it.
After 4 years of negotiations, Bushnell and Baer met for the first time on the steps of the federal court in Chicago in 1976. Rather than go before a judge, Bushnell and his lawyer agreed to pay a license fee in recognition of Baer's patents.
Within days, they had an agreement for a prepaid license for a very reasonable amount. He really got away with murder.
Magnavox accepted a settlement of $400,000. Ralph Baer won justice, but none of the international recognition that Bushnell enjoyed.
He was characterized as the father of video games because he was always out there and in front of the cameras, and I'm behind the scenes with the lawyers telling me, cool it, Baer, right? He's a licensee, cool it. Right?
25 years on, Ralph Baer has retired, but he's determined to finish his autobiography and set the record straight over the true origins of computer games. For Bushnell, the settlement came cheap. Atari was already making millions. But as computer games entered a golden era of popularity, Atari faced a new threat, what appeared to be an unstoppable world-conquering game from Japan. In 1978, Taito released a game that became so popular in Japan that it caused a nationwide shortage of 100 yen coins. Called Space Invaders, it sold over 350,000 units around the world and triggered a renaissance in the arcade business. Atari responded with their own brand of space-themed games. Nolan Bushnell's team of engineers pioneered a new technology called vector graphics, with a striking new look. In 1979, Asteroids became Atari's all-time bestseller. They followed Asteroids with another massive hit entitled Battlezone. Arcades sprang up everywhere, and teenagers and young adults all over the world spent every spare moment and all their spare cash in them. Parents and politicians began to express their concerns. The press was full of stories from around the world of truancy and delinquency. Arcades were branded as evil dens of iniquity, where kids could be easily led astray. But Atari had a solution. Back in 1975, Atari's engineers had secretly started working on a radical new concept. Known as the VCS, or Video Computer System, it would play arcade games in the relative comfort and safety of home.
So here we have the first prototype of the Atari VCS cartridge video game system. It has all the things you need in a prototype. We had the actual logic wire wrap board here and some joysticks and controls from the tank game. We figured we knew we needed this game, had to play Pong, had to play Tank, and had to do the driving games. And beyond that, we weren't sure what we were going to do with it.
The VCS launched in 1977. Since Atari were the #1 producers of arcade hits, they were able to produce a whole series of must-have VCS conversions. And in 1980, Atari bought the home video game rights to Space Invaders.
Atari Space Invaders are here. Now you can play the world's most popular arcade game in your own home. Space-age action on your own TV screen. Plus, all the excitement.
That Christmas, millions of VCS consoles were sold, just so that teenagers could play Space Invaders at home. Thanks to the overwhelming success of the VCS, Atari's annual revenues passed $1 billion. The company's meteoric rise attracted the attention of major players. Warner Communications made Bushnell an offer he couldn't refuse. They offered $28 million to buy Atari, an extraordinary return on Bushnell's startup capital of $500.
Everyone's gone Atari, the #1 video game.
It was a lot of money in those days. It was more money than I ever thought I'd make.
But it was the beginning of the end for Atari. Bushnell stayed on as chief executive, but was soon at odds with the new management.
We were just launching the VCS, and I said, well, you know, the VCS is over. And they say, what? I said, well, no, you have to think of it that way. And they were horrified.
The new Warner bosses were unimpressed with how the company was run.
They were New Yorkers, and they didn't understand it. They thought it was very, very bizarre. And they set about, piece by piece, really dismantling the corporate culture and fundamentally destroying the company. It was the damnedest thing I'd ever seen.
A series of showdowns with the new bosses eventually, inevitably, led to Bushnell being removed. He was paid off and shown the door. The industry had lost its pioneering visionary. But Atari's problems weren't over. Under the new regime, star designers like David Crane found they were no longer valued for their role in the company's extraordinary success.
There were a lot of promises made that weren't kept.
We had some very key engineers that were doing the cartridges for the home games that were making like $50,000, $60,000 a year. In 3 or 4 months, they'd produce the software for a cartridge that would sell $100 million worth of stuff, and these engineers could do the math.
If they really didn't think we were worth more than the person who put screws in the plastic, then we were at the wrong company.
David Crane and 3 other top designers left Atari and set up their own company, Activision. After 2 years of legal wrangles with Atari, they won the right to design and publish their own games for the VCS. Activision produced many of the best-loved VCS titles, and Crane himself designed its most successful game of all, Pitfall.
Every game we developed sold 500,000 units at least, so they were all hits. And then when Pitfall came out and sold many millions of units, it was the biggest. What we were developing at that time with Pitfall was the first platform game.
Activision rekindled the creative spirit of the early days at Atari. But it also, unwittingly, triggered a disaster.
A lot of business people saw only our success and unfortunately flooded the market with product that nobody wanted to buy.
Atari contributed to a public loss of confidence in computer games with hurriedly produced, poor-quality games like E.T. Millions of copies of this game ended up as landfill. The market for computer games crashed, and in 1983, Warner announced second-quarter losses of over $250 million, and their shares plummeted.
I absolutely regret the Warner sale. I think it was the stupidest thing I've ever